Charles Spencer's here now, as we said. Yeah, as I said, it's 27 years since your sister died in Paris that night. How alive in your memory is she now?
Very, and in so many people's. I mean, even when I was in makeup just now, somebody came up almost crying, saying how much that she meant to them. And every day people tell me what an inspiration she was, how much they miss her, what they did the day she died. It's extraordinary.
I think everybody remembers exactly what they were doing when they heard the news.
Yes.
How did you hear the news, Charles?
I was on the telephone to my middle sister, Jane, and her husband worked for the Queen, and he was on another line, and I heard him go, "Oh, no." Oh. And that's when my sister said what had happened. So, yeah, no, I remember it, I mean, like yesterday.
And what are your reflections on, as I say, 27 years, nearly 3 decades, on the passage of time and how it assuages grief?
Yes, well, I think, I mean, I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this programme has had trauma in their family at some point. And like everyone else, you sort of get used to it without it ever going away.
Yeah. And, of course, she's buried at home.
Yes, she is. And I go pretty much every day
Do you?
there, yes, yes.
And do you talk to her when you're there?
Well, not always, but it was lovely last week. I had one of her closest childhood friends came and was on the island, and that was so nice, you know.
She's on the island in the lake, isn't she?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And for your 60th birthday,
Yes.
you received a very special gift.
I did. Well remembered, Susanna. Yes, a friend of mine handmade. He's a brilliant scientist, but he's also a craftsman, and he handmade a canoe, which I can use going backwards and forwards. So that's quite nice.
Lovely.
That's wonderful. You have a book, a new book out, and the last time we spoke about a very different type of book, because you wrote an extraordinarily, explosively powerful memoir, A Very Private School, about your experience at boarding school as a very young boy.
Yes.
And how devastating that had been. I mean, talk about trauma. You'd finally sort of managed to process the trauma that you had experienced at that school. We talked at the time about the fact people were getting in touch with you with their own stories. That must be a lot to handle, because you're dealing with your own experience, but to then feel like you have a responsibility to communicate with people about theirs. How are you managing that?
Well, I received scores of letters. The ones that were from pupils from the same school I replied to personally. Right. The others I felt I had no expertise. I said how sorry I was they had suffered it and gave them a list of charities and groups they could talk to. But it's been people I thought I knew at school living with terrible abuse, because the abusers tend to silo you and peel you off and do what they do secretly, and they had no idea it was going on with others. No. So anyway, yeah, something completely different today.
Yeah, so a much different nature. I'm just taking all the Post-it notes off my copy of it. So this is called the Rabbit Hole book. This is a wonderful collection of what feels like just random essays.
Yes.
It's almost as if we didn't have the internet, and you're sitting at dinner and saying, who wrote, for instance, I don't know, the first obituary? Yes. And then you can go, instead of going, oh, let me use my phone and look that up.
It's in the book.
Grab the Rabbit Hole book and the answer is there.
And I've co-written it with the Reverend Richard Coles, who is an unusual vicar, having been on Strictly and having been a #1 pop star in the 80s. Yeah.
How did you meet?
Well, we both come from Northamptonshire, and we went to a slightly stilted drinks party, and I saw a vicar coming, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to get any better. And then he was incredibly naughty, and I thought, we're going to be friends. You know, it was I can't repeat what he said, but it was very funny. And then Kat Jarman, who is my partner now, actually, but she's a brilliant archaeologist, and it sounds like an Alan Partridge title, but she is Nordic Person of 2024, which is usually handed out to someone like Sven-Göran Eriksson or a composer or something.
What do you have to do to be Nordic Person of the Year?
You have to be respected throughout all Scandinavian and Nordic countries and
which
come
she
top.
Clearly is.
Yeah. So anyway, what I would say with the book, we bring quite different things. But we all do a podcast together called The Rabbit Hole Detectives, and then out of that came this book. We've each got 33 chapters of 3 pages long, which is very good for me because I have very short attention span.
It's a great bedtime book.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. And actually, Richard, I hope you won't mind, but I've got one chapter I did on sunbathing, and I thought of your wonderful hue, which I can never emulate because I'm the whitest person I know.
I saw the chapter heading on that last night,
Yeah.
but I didn't get to that one. I read about 6 or 7 of the others. What's the one on sunbathing?
Well, I mentioned that it's been going on for 3,500 years, but the way it became fashionable, so for thousands of years it was not a good thing because it meant that you were working in the fields or whatever. But then in the 1920s... Coco Chanel got sunburnt on a yacht.
That's right, yeah, in the south of France.
And then she said, well, this is the index of chic, you know, slightly helping herself. She was, an early influencer, I suppose. And from then on, you've got sunbathing becoming a thing. And I've seen you on the North Cornish coast, not sunbathing, but braving the sun, and it's a very good thing.
In fact, it's people, I think I read somewhere, people who go in the sun a lot, on average, live a bit longer.
That's absolutely right. Look, I'm not going to go against Dr. Hillary or someone who's, put your sunscreen on. But people who spend more time in the sun live an extra 2 or 3 years on average, as long as it's not bursting through, you know.
I'm going to be cheeky because you've told us the inside story of how you met the Reverend Richard Coles.
Yes.
So what's the inside story of how you met your current partner, Kat Jarman? It's also part of this wonderful book.
Yes. So Kat and I... well, first of all, I met her because we both have the same publisher, but secondly, I know this sounds rather bizarre, but she came to dig up a Roman villa on the land, some land I've got. And then Richard Coles, Kat and I would end up together. Richard had been recently bereaved, so he was semi-living with me. And the three of us would just talk and talk and talk. Wow. And Kat said, let's do a podcast. And out of the podcast came this book.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
The rabbit hole book. 99 adventures into the history of stuff. Did you decide not to do 100 for some reason?
Well, we couldn't divide it 3 ways.
Oh,
so
of course.
It's an obvious answer.
Yes.
It's an obvious answer.
No, but it has been really fun to do. And what we try... In the podcast, we try and give each other a really difficult subject and challenge the person to be interesting on it. And I once gave Kat the paperclip, and she made it so fascinating. And it just shows, if you go quirky enough, the whole idea of the rabbit hole is you dive down one piece of knowledge and then you go in different directions and find other things.
What was the first obituary?
Gosh, I can't remember, but I was... The crossword, the one
You can find it on page 35.
I have to say that one thing, though, the one I found most interesting, all the facts in the book, was crossword. The man who invented it, it was a Victorian game, and he called it... The very first one was in 1913. He called it the word cross. But somebody in editing thought he had made a mistake and called it crossword. Otherwise, we'd call them word crosses.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh. There you go. They're a quirky one to end on.
It's lovely to see you.
Nice to see you.
And to you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Always
the best.
fun.